So in this segment, we're going to discuss this one from a bit ago that I wanted to cover because I do have a bet with someone regarding when there'll be a general election. Essentially they've got until just about the start of the year, I think. And if there's no general election, I win 10 quid. So I have a vested interest in this. But, from a strategic point of view, because there's another person who's obsessed with strategy because he thinks he's Sun Tzu or something, they're not going to hold an election this year. Holding an election this year makes no sense, especially if you know in your heart there's a strong chance you might lose. You're going to drag it out as long as possible, especially after the by-election losses. So this is some analysis from Beth Rigby.
I mean, it was an awful, awful night for the Conservatives, and I think that
we love to see it.
The Conservative Party are in despair from the MPs I have spoken to, one saying that, the Tory relaunch as it was at party conference has stalled. There's no move towards the leadership or the cabinet on the doorstep, and there's no sort of sense of improvement or no way that they can see improvement. So then the next question is, do they switch it up? What do they do now? I mean,
they're waiting for inflation to come down to around 3%, but that's not forecast to happen until, I think, just past the end of next year. So, I don't know what... They're waiting on a miracle, effectively, and that's not going to happen given the way they've tanked the economy, given the decisions they have made here.
I think in terms of Sunak's position, the idea that letters of no confidence will go in, MPs say, yeah, some may go in, but the idea of another leadership challenge when they've had 3 prime ministers in just over a year, and he has a huge rump of the Conservative Parliamentary Party that want him to stay.
I've heard about 20 or so no letters of confidence have gone in. Letters of no confidence. The problem is only Sir Graham Brady knows, and Sir Graham Brady will never tell. The other problem is it's important to remember the majority of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, the MPs, wanted Rishi Sunak. They rigged the rules so that it would be Rishi Sunak. They said you need the support of over 100 MPs to get there, and the only ones who were close to getting that were Boris Johnson, who essentially tanked Penny Mordaunt's run, and Penny Mordaunt, who I think she got in the 80s. But because Boris Johnson was kind of threatening to run, I think he kind of tanked her support a bit. But important to remember that it was Rishi Sunak that was the favourite of the Conservative Party. Even the one he lost against Truss, he had the support of over 100 Tory MPs. So I don't think the Conservative Parliamentary Party will want him out. The problem is there's not much hope there. The Conservative Party has such a diverse set of MPs in terms of geography, that some are based in the Red Wall, some don't want the gravy train to end, and so they're going to be desperately hoping something can happen, maybe some cash coming their way for their constituency, etc., in order to win over some support, because I think they know it's Jehovah for them. I think they know it.
I think in terms of changing strategy, I think we're going to have to see what happens. They've got the Queen's speech coming up. That's when he can lay down the legislative agenda. They then have the budget in November. But I think at the moment there's a sense now within the Conservative Party that they are heading for defeat. They feel it, and it's more how do you minimise the losses. And I think the thing for me that comes out of this is if you are a Prime Minister that likes being Prime Minister, that goes to the Middle East and you think you can make effective change in the situation in the Hamas-Israel war, you're not going to want to give up the job. So what it says to me tonight is that when we think about when that general election might come, perhaps Mr Sunak is going to now play it very, very long.
That's a really interesting point, though. If you're one of those kind of macho people who think, I can go around to other countries and make a difference and whatever, I can be the big man effectively, that point makes a lot of sense. And that's something I didn't think about, especially given in the context of the COVID inquiries that we're having, where Helen McNamara, who is I think she's a former civil servant, I'm not sure if she's still there, she said that a lot of the problems were because of ego. Or some of the problems were because of ego, because of macho men making decisions without any kind of consideration of people who weren't also men, children, women, etc. So I think that point there is very interesting, that it might be pride, like they like being, foreign secretary or home secretary, they like having power. So why would you risk it by having an election now, especially if you think it's going to be over for you? Why would you risk it? Because Sunak getting a hung parliament would be a miracle. If he managed that, that's a win. because of the disastrous state the Conservative Party are in and the disastrous state the party are in. Let's not forget, Labour do have a 20-point lead on them. If by somehow we end up with a hung parliament, that would be something.
Doesn't have to call it until, dare I say it, January 2025.
Stop.
That'll be the last point. It'll be basically automatic, I think, at that point. I don't know why Sophie Ridge is getting so annoyed about that. But, I think Sunak will drag it out as long as possible because there will be no economic miracle coming next year. Or even this year, there'll be no economic miracle coming next year. But things, the statistics will look better next year with inflation coming down because naturally the prices can't keep increasing like that unless we bring in import checks, which they kept pushing back. So what they're going to do is hope inflation comes down and then take a victory lap. That's all they can do because on his 5 promises, I think he's failed all of them. He's failed absolutely all of them. So he's going to go into the King's Speech. He's going to set out a new agenda, new plans for next year, probably things that are probably more attainable. And he's going to try and push that as we go into a general election. My theory is autumn of next year. But I don't know. I think they're going to want to use the 2 budgets to force a tax cut somehow, to try and put more money in people's pockets. That's their only way of shoring up some support. Tory MPs are begging for tax cuts, begging for something they can go back to their constituencies with. Jeremy Hunt has given them nothing, because there is nothing to give. There's not much slack in the economy. That's one of the problems Liz Truss ran into, where she wanted to do the tax cuts based on borrowing, and she didn't give any of the projections or anything like that based on what would happen if we went with these plans and the economy tanked, the bond market tanked. Jeremy Hunt can't risk that. He knows UK bonds are a bit ropey at the moment, so that's why I think one of the reasons he's trying to be careful with tax cuts. That's why they're looking at cutting benefits, cutting welfare even more, in order to try and fund a tax cut. But I don't think it'll be enough. I don't think they've knackered the economy so badly. There's not much slack in it anymore, and I'm just concerned. I don't know what they're going to do next year because they're going to be desperate. But, for all of those people saying, it strategically makes sense to hold an election next year, logic doesn't come into politics. Politics is an emotional game. That's the one thing you've got to remember about politics. It's an emotional game. And I think Rishi Sunak, maybe in his heart, knows that there's a very small chance of him winning an election, and his best chance is trying to drag it into next year so the statistics will look slightly better. The inflation rates will look slightly better, even though the price is going to be higher next year. I think that's what his plan is. The guy's desperate. He's a spin merchant. He's not very good. But if he's trying to, if there was an election this year, he'd get cooked. But, if it's the case like Beth Rigby was saying that these people like power as well, it would make sense to drag it out a bit longer. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hopefully I'll win my bet because then I can buy pizza. And because your boy loves pizza like a Ninja Turtle. And I'll catch you in the next one. Support me on Patreon so I can buy more pizzas. No, I'm joking. I use that money for generally for YouTube equipment. Catch you in the next one.